My name is Marie. I am a PhD student of marriage and family therapy with a concentration in education and supervision. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about the benefits and limits of distance learning, and how we can capitalize on the benefits and kind of mitigate the disadvantages. First, it's important to understand that research on online education or distance education is lacking, especially in the field of counseling and marriage and family therapy. But 25% of students enrolled in CACREP accredited courses are distance learners. And CACREP is the organization that accredits counseling programs for mental health counselors. I was unable to find the percentage for CACREP, or not CACREP, COAMFI, which is the Marriage and Family Therapy accreditation. There are many benefits to online learning or distance education. First is the flexibility to work and care for our family, which is really important to a lot of distance learners, myself included. There's statistically more diversity in distance learning. There's more racial and cultural and sexual orientation, and all of that stuff are very different and a lot more varied in distance learning than in traditional face-to-face learning, which kind of gives you some really cool opportunities to learn from people of very different backgrounds. You get other points of view on research that's maybe more focused on like the majority, right, white people, and you rarely get that opportunity. It is changing. I've noticed a lot of research is a lot more multicultural now, but traditionally research was not diverse. We get that point of view in distance learning that sometimes you lack in face-to-face education. There is some research to point to online learners as having more self-discipline, higher standards for themselves, and more motivation to complete their work, which is a benefit, definitely. And there is also some research that shows that at the end of their education, online learners report more self-efficacy than face-to-face learners, which is kind of the really big doubt that a lot of people have about distance learning. They don't think that it can be as effective or is the same as face-to-face learning. And one research study says that it is at least as effective. But not only are there benefits for the students, there's benefits for the university. It reduces cost, which can be passed on to the student. If you think about all of the things that go into paying for or organizing a face-to-face class, much of that is eliminated. Students have access to various online research databases that can give them the information rather than having to have a library. Administration costs can be reduced because there's not any figuring out where this class is going to meet and what time, and all that organization stuff is completely eliminated, which reduces costs for universities. And they're really easy to organize and stay running smoothly, with minimal effort on the university part, which saves a lot of money, making online education a lot more affordable, which also opens it up to more diverse populations, which is kind of a huge benefit. So what are the limits, right? Everything has positives and negatives. What are the negatives? First, there's less group interaction. Some people, that might be a benefit, but in the counseling education, traditional education, there's a lot of meeting with peers and cooperating and practicing and all these skills that come into play that are new, and all of that is taken away, at least in the traditional sense, for distance learning. Professors can't observe students practicing these soft skills or practicing counseling approaches. That's, in traditional education, is something that a professor could watch, observe, or critique, or probably critique, and that's not an option in most online education. I do know that my master's program asked us to fly to a location for 2 weeks out of the program to do that specifically, to do really intensive workshops, to practice soft skills, to practice counseling, peers and things like that, so that professors could watch us. It was a very limited part of the program, but I did get a little bit of that in my online master's program. So there are opportunities for kind of replacing that limitation or mitigating that limitation, but I don't know if that's a very large practice in a lot of educational institutions that do online master's programs for counseling. Another limitation is the inability to make sure that students have access to the same kinds of technology. Students in rural areas are probably going to have less strong or less fast internet connections, and really complex programming and video chatting and all of those things work poorly for people in rural areas. People may not be able to afford computers fast enough to actually run programs that are more complex, which is not a huge problem to my knowledge in the counseling field, but in some distance education programs it may be a problem. There are higher dropout rates for online education. A couple of the reasons mentioned were the lack of interaction, inability to run the technology or understand the way that the program is presented to them. So keeping that in mind when picking a platform to present the education, to present the class to students is important. It needs to be easy to understand, easy to run, and easy to find everything. And the other downside is a lack of understanding of course material or the delivery platform, which has already been mentioned, but understanding the course material is important, and not having that instantaneous answer can be frustrating for online students. So how do we capitalize on the benefits? There's a lot of ways to capitalize on the benefits of distance learning. The first is applying critical thinking assignments, making students think for themselves and finding an answer. So first, applying assignments to real life, figuring out why am I learning this, what's the point, and how am I going to use it in my everyday life is really important, I would assume, in any field of study, but for sure counseling. How am I going to use this with real clients? Advanced research opportunities. So having students find an answer to a problem or to a field that they are really interested in, and giving them that freedom to study that particular thing. Interviewing real life professionals, finding counselors, finding that professional person in their community and having a conversation with them. Another one is instructional technology. So a very common one is discussion forums, kind of mitigating that lack of communication with other people by doing it in a virtual way, communicating with peers and with the professor in shorter assignments on really important topics in the field. Watching video instruction can also be really helpful, whether that's the professor themselves or some video instruction that the professor found very helpful in explaining or demonstrating a particular skill can be very helpful. Listening to podcasts was also mentioned, but also not mentioned at all is the future technologies, keeping an eye on what's coming out and how can it be applied. There are some research articles that talk about medical students using virtual reality to teach them empathy. And that technology can be applied directly, but also altered to better fit counseling for online education so that you can practice the soft skills and practice practice counseling people in a way that's similar to face-to-face learning. And so keeping an eye on technology and how can it be applied in an affordable and easy to use way is important for distance learning. And capitalizing on personal responsibility, having people learn their own lessons while they're also learning the lesson that's being taught. So how do we mitigate limitations? First is faculty engagement. So the professor needs to be timely and regular with their feedback and give more feedback, I would say, than traditional face-to-face learning. The students are not able to have face-to-face conversations, and video conferencing and telephone calls are often a possibility, but lengthy feedback and timely feedback is a lot more helpful for students when it comes to actual assignments. The second thing is sharing the expertise. Often the faculty member has been in the field for potentially a very long time and done really interesting things with their careers, and it's really important for them to share pertinent pieces of that with students so that they can kind of see what's possible. And the other thing is be technologically proficient. Understand what you're doing as a professor technologically because it helps the students their education run smoothly. So understanding that is important. The last point is diversity in education. We've already talked about how distance learning is a lot more diverse than face-to-face learning statistically, and how those points of view can be really important in the conversations that people have in online learning. But also the bringing access to people who previously didn't have it before. Maybe bringing access to countries that didn't have that kind of education before. So not just in the United States, but globally, understanding how distance education can bring new opportunities to people who have not had access, have not been able to go to school because they had to support their family and all of that stuff, right? So not having to pick up everything and move to a university to get the same education that you could before is a really huge positive of online learning. So thank you.